to the show, guys. You are tuned into Two Guys One Octagon. As always, thank you, ISO Lando, for bringing us in. We'll get his links to Look Mom, I'm a Rapper below for iTunes and Spotify. I'm your co-host, Jesse Moreno, joined by our other co-host, John Logan Hines. JL, how are you doing in the beautiful state of Colorado?
I'm doing well, man. We have a great episode coming up for you guys. And more importantly, we've got a great card on UFC 251. Very excited to talk about it. We got some plays for you. We're going to do some news stories as well. But yeah, I we had a week off, no fights, and I feel a little bit starved for the action. So I'm excited to get back into it.
Definitely a little rejuvenated. I think the last fight that we all saw was Poirier Hooker. So we're all coming off of a high going into fight weekend. Big news coming out a couple days ago about Jorge Masvidal being the replacement for Gilbert Burns. We're going to get all into it. We got a new format coming at you guys today for how we're going to run these episodes. We got an MMA show rolling your way. We're going to kick things off with obviously diving into UFC 251. For you betting lovers, we're going to break down the entire card today, all the way from the early prelims, all the way up to the main event of Masvidal versus Usman, giving you a breakdown. We're going to run through the whole undercard of the bottom 10 fights, 1 minute per fight, give you our betting analysis, giving you our lock of the week, our dog of the week. Then JL are going to go head-to-head on the Masvidal, Usman, Holloway, Volkanovski, and Jan Aldo, where we both give you our breakdowns on those fights. Then we're going to show you a new segment, Two Guys One Octagon Newsroom, where we go over the biggest news going on in MMA right now. Dun, 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 dun. Followed up by our last segment, the MMA Great Debate. We're going to be going over one of the biggest debates of the year. Is Dana White paying the UFC roster justly? We're going to get all into that today. But as always, we're going to kick it off with the main card.
Before we do so, man, I do want to show everybody my Fight Island tattoo. I got this on Friday. Got this especially for Fight Island. I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm from Florida, so I was repping my home state. But it's working out nicely. It's working out nicely for Fight Island. So I'm excited about that, and I don't even need the shirt anymore. So
I think you should have just rolled with it, dude. I think you should have just showed the viewers your commitment to Two Guys One Octagon, and that tattoo is for Yas Island. You got it. Those palm trees are the ones right behind the octagon that everyone's seeing on Instagram.
Fuck yeah, bro. Look at those palm trees.
All right, so we're kicking off our breakdown. Here are the rules, guys. We got 1 minute to break down each fight. JL and I are going to run through the bottom 10 cards, everything from Davy Grant and Martin Day all the way up to Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, the fights right before the title fights. So let's get the clock rolling right now. Kicking things off for the night with Davy Grant versus Martin Day. We got two fighters that are relatively young in the UFC right now. We don't have a lot on Martin Day as far as a UFC track record, as well as the talent that he's fought. It's hard to really get an idea of who it is. Same thing for Davy Grant. We don't really know where he stands. He got submitted by Manny Bermudez. The odds makers are looking at it the same way. -110, +110. It's a 50-50 fight here. For me, there's not enough of a sample size for me to pull from, for me to get a strong lean one way or the other. The money looks like it's coming in on Martin Day, mainly because he looks like more of a diverse striker. But for me, it's a clean stay away simply because we don't have a large enough sample size to put on Martin Day, and Davy Grant is just a flyer. If you want to get lucky, take a UFC live bet, go that way. But to me, there's not much value there. Shifting into the next fight, we got Marcin Tybura versus Maxim Grishin. If I'm being honest, Marcin Tybura is the definition of a journeyman through and through. He's fought the best in the UFC heavyweight division. He's won some, he's lost some. And Maxim Grishin is a PFL legitimate contender and fighter. I believe he was the champion in PFL, if I'm not mistaken. So you got a hot prospect coming from the PFL, making his UFC debut against a journeyman. Doesn't take a rocket science to figure out who the UFC wants to win this fight. For me, I'm always hesitant, though, to see fighters come from one organization to another, especially being the UFC. It's different drug testing. A fight on Fight Island as your UFC debut in Yas Island, I think it's going to get a little bit even more unpredictable as far as those UFC jitters on a big pay-per-view. For me, I think it's another clean stay away, guys. If you want to get itchy, pull it on Maxine Grisham. He's the better fighter, but there is no bet on Marcin Tybura here. All right, Jay, I'm kicking it to you.
Jesse, I don't know if I like the no bet plays, kicking it off early there. But the good news is we've got one coming up for you here with Muslim Salikov and definitely not going to say his name right, Dos Santos. So the line has moved quite a bit, obviously coming down from minus 190 to open up for Salikov, now down to minus 120. You see Dos Santos getting to almost even odds. The way I see it, this is almost an even fight as well. Muslim Salikov, known as the king of Kung Fu, he's a low-volume striker, but he's got 80% of his wins via knockout. He does a really good job controlling the center. On the opposite side, you got Dos Santos, who is a patient fighter. He picks his spots, pretty accurate striker, and also throws more volume than Salikov does. So I look at this one of two ways. I could see if this goes to decision, I won't be surprised if the even odds underdog Dos Santos actually takes the W here for the judges for just being more of the aggressor. However, my official pick on this one, going with Muslim Salikov, I think both are going to look good in spurts. Both are going to throw some spinning heel kicks, but I think Muslim's going to be the one that has the power to potentially get a KO there, and I'm going with Muslim.
I like it. All right, shifting over to Leonardo Dos Santos and Roman Bogatov. It's been really interesting to look at this line, really not move too much. You got some money coming in Leonardo, and then you also got some coming in on Roman. Again, I think I'm probably going to lean with Leonardo Dos Santos because I think he has more of a complete game. I also am hoping to see him grow in certain areas because I think he has the higher ceiling between him and Roman. So for me, first play of the night, I'm going to go Santos. I think the minus 175 to 63% implied probability, I think that's right in line with how I'm feeling. So I'm going Leonardo Dos Santos. Next fight, Carol Rosa versus Vanessa Mello. My thoughts on this one, I think all the way Vanessa Mello, I feel bad for her UFC career so far. She's really been set up to fail in a lot of these matchups. She's fought Irene Aldana, which JL, me and you both know how great she is. And then she's fought Tracy Cortez, which to me looks like UFC's trying to make her into the next Paige Van Zant with how they're marketing her. Don't know if that potential is there, but they're definitely pushing Tracy and matching her up with Vanessa was just kind of like teeing her up to lose. I think this is a similar situation. I think Carol Rosa is the better fighter. She's the better striker. And I think the fight is going to take place where she needs it to be. To be honest, though, I can't take a bet on Carol Rosa. And the reason being is, one, betting on women's MMA gets a little tricky sometimes, especially at a minus 240. That's asking me to lay a lot of wood to get not much value out of it. So I'm going to lean a no bet here. If Carol Rosa starts to take off early in the fight, I might look for a live bet here. But guys, minus 240, I recommend staying away from it. Carol Rosa let her last opponent stay in the fight way too long, and it was a high striking contest against a jiu-jitsu fighter when she should have been the better striker. Keep the money home on this one. We got other places to win it. One of those places, I think, might be Danny Henry versus Makwan Amirkhani. Makwan Amirkhani, we know what we're going to get from him every single time. We're going to get basic striking, decent wrestling, good submissions, and terrible cardio. Look no further than his last fight against Shane Burgos. What we don't know in this fight, though, is how Danny Henry's going to look. Danny Henry actually has only had 2 fights in the last 2.5 years. We don't have a big sample size from him, but we do know he's a diverse fighter. He's got 5 KOs. He's got 5 submissions, and he's going to go for those submissions if Makwan gets him down to the ground or even up against the cage. The guy attempts 2.97 submissions a fight, and his striking output is pretty high as well. I think if Danny Henry gets out of the first round, I'm looking at going heavy on him on a live bet. I'm going to hold on to my chips early, though. I don't think making a move right now is the move. I think we see how Danny Henry reacts to that Makwan pressure of the first round. If Makwan doesn't get him out of there right away, I think it's a done deal. Danny Henry all the way.
Well, I had to really think about this one because, again, Jesse is assigning me on purpose names that he knows that I can't say. So we've got Zagalas, Zahum. Yeah, it's gonna be a rough one, man. So, I think this with Raulian Paiva. Is it Paiva?
I don't know.
I think I said it right. Raulian Paiva versus Zagalas. I think we're going to actually see an interesting fight here. One of the cool things about Paiva, though he's been 1-2 in the UFC since coming on board for the Contender Series, I will say that his last fight against Mark De La Rosa was really the best fight he had, and obviously it was the one that he won. But it was showing a little bit more composure for a young 24-year-old fighter. Compare that against Zagalas, who is making his UFC debut, looks a heck of a lot like a creative player in UFC 4, apparently soon to be released.
The default one.
Yeah, default player that you would see in one of those games. All jokes aside, I do think Paiva is going to show that patience that he showed against Mark De La Rosa. I think he has enough on his feet to kind of keep Zagalas guessing, and is confident enough in the clinch from what I saw specifically against Mark De La Rosa with his, with that more calm and composed style. I think Paiva is going to make this a little bit more uncomfortable and actually fights a lot like a vet, especially if we're going off of that last fight. And I just, I don't feel comfortable putting money on a guy making his UFC debut, and especially a guy who hasn't had a knockout since 2017. Looks like he would have power, but hasn't had a knockout in quite some time. So no pick here. I would say stay away. The line has moved far too much for me to get to a point where I'm comfortable taking Paiva. But if that's the direction you want to go, I would lean that way.
Paiva is one of the younger fighters in the UFC too. I believe he's only 24. He doesn't have too many UFC fights. So yeah, it is kind of a risky move if we are to pull Paiva, especially at minus 175. But shifting into the next fight, one of, I think, could be the most exciting fight on the card as far as pop and knockout value. It's Jiri Prochazka. Let's get some brownie points on that one. I think I got it. And
you got a drink for sure.
And Volkan Ozdemir. Volkan, through and through, this guy has had not the easiest run at light heavyweight. He's had some tough matchups. He got his way up to a title fight, being a knockout artist, ran into DC, who really exposed his ground game, then lost to Anthony Smith and Dominic Reyes, which was a tough run to him. But credit to him, he's kept getting better fight in and fight out. If you look at his fights against Dominic Reyes, I think you can make an argument that he won that fight. You look at his fight against Ayir Latifi, I dominated that fight and was probably the best Volkan we've ever seen. And then he edged out a split decision against Rakic. Volkan Ozdemir just keeps getting better and better and better and growing in the sport. But if you look at Jiri, he's making his UFC debut coming over from Rizin. Now, for you hardcore fans, I'm sure you know who Rizin is, the Rizin promotion. For some of you fans that aren't too familiar, Rizin is the new Pride. And if go YouTube some fights from Pride or go YouTube Rizin. Rizin gets a little liberal on their drug testing. There's some weird fights going on there. If you look at Jiri's last fight, he fought CB Dalloway, which is an ex-UFC middleweight. CB Dalloway's jacked to the gills, taking some Mexican supplements that I can't even say. And Jiri
Do you know what they are, or you just can't say them?
I can't say them. I legitimately don't know. But Jiri caught CB Dalloway with a beautiful uppercut hook combo. He knocked out Fabio Maldonado. He's got an impressive record of 26 wins, 3 losses, but 23 KOs on that. For me, though, coming in from Rizin to the UFC, that's a big jump for me, like I talked about earlier on this card. For me, I like Volkan Ozdemir at minus 165. That's going to be my first official play of the night where I'm blocking in right now. I'm going to do a half unit play on Volkan Ozdemir. I think this is too big of a step up for Jiri. I think that's a red flag for me, especially coming over from a questionable drug testing promotion. I like Volkan a lot in this fight.
All right, so moving into the real meat of the card, the cool thing about UFC 251 is from the time that Paige Van Zant and Amanda Ribas step into the octagon, it's going to be all action for the rest of the night. I mean, we got 5 straight fights that's going to be just really fun to watch. So I'm going to start by talking about PVZ and Amanda Ribas. Obviously, I think the first thing that jumps out to us is the line movement here. Ribas opening up as a strong favorite already, but moving to minus 900, 8% change on the line there, and Paige, in my opinion, being disrespected and moving to a plus 600 mark there. To me, that just screams stay away from the beginning. And I think it's something that is very much like the Roxanne Modafferi versus Macy Barber fight that we saw. What was that? Probably 2019 at this point. I can't remember off the top of my head.
January 2020.
It's so long.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, 2020. I think it's very similar to that fight. I could see an underdog PVZ having the capability. She has the technical ability to win this fight, and I certainly think Ribas is the better fighter. But there's no reason that Paige Van Zant should be a plus 600 underdog. I think that the odds makers right now are taking in, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, are taking into consideration the fact that this might be her last UFC fight. Maybe she's not as motivated, but to me, she looks like she's in shape. I know she's been training. She's always shown a high level of professionalism. I really can't see her not taking this seriously. And for that alone, if I was going to put money on it, which I think I probably will put a flyer on it at plus 600, I'm going with Paige Van Zant. I think the fight's going to stay on the feet. I think it will probably go the distance. And with Ribas being the more technical fighter, I understand why she's such a heavy favorite. But I just don't feel good about that, putting money on it on Ribas with the technical ability that PVZ has.
Has to be value at plus 600, 14% implied probability. That is disrespectful, as you said.
Okay, so then moving on to that next fight, Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas, a much anticipated rematch between these two fighters. Looking at the last time they fought, we saw Rose, especially in the first round, come out with as always, a fucking high level of striking ability. She cut Jessica Andrade up. She looked like she was winning the fight until Jessica Andrade started to make it a little bit messy, started to catch her with that left hook, and then use it as an entry point, in order to get Rose in an uncomfortable situation. It was very obvious that Jessica Andrade is the more powerful and stronger fighter, whereas Rose is very much the more technically gifted fighter. This one's tough, man. It's really tough to see Rose as a minus 210 favorite. I really feel like the odds should be a little bit closer based off of what Andrade was able to do when she got her in a close situation and in the clinch. That being said, I do think that with Rose having that high level of striking, I feel like she's gotten some of that focus back. Listening to with her interview last week, I feel like she's in a place where she's been able to correct some of those mistakes from the first fight. Maybe not going to get in a situation where she's, hanging on to the back of Andrade for a half of a round, which is, what it felt like in that first fight, in a situation where, if things go right for Rose, she certainly has the power to drop anybody, and the technical ability that when she places those punches right, there's a chance that it drops. I would say, because the odds, I feel like minus 210 is too high to take Rose. I do feel like this should be closer. I'm only going to do a half unit play on Rose Namajunas, but I do like her to avenge her loss there. Jessica's going to try to make it messy again, but if Rose is learning lessons, and I do believe she's the very intelligent fighter and is going to learn from her mistakes in the last fight, I do see Rose actually having that rematch win here. It's tough to beat the same fighter twice. It really is.
It definitely is, and it's a hard time to bet against a Trevor Whitman fighter too. So Rose Namajunas obviously being a Trevor Whitman fighter, so I like it. Moving into the 3 title fights on UFC 251, all championship fights, all in hotly contested divisions. This is going to kick off our head-to-head section where JL and I both go head-to-head on each one of these fights to give you our picks, to let you know what we think. We're going to dive a little deeper into each one of these fights. Obviously, let's go with the flow of the card here, kicking off with the 135-pound world championship fight. With Henry Cejudo out of the picture, we have Peter Yan, no undoubtedly
Peter.
contender. Jose Aldo coming off of a loss to Marlon Moraes, but a big name, a legit talent, and a lot of people think that Jose actually won that fight. JL, I'm going to let you take this right from the start, man. What is your lean? Where are you going? What do you think this story is?
So I'm glad you kicked it to me first, because I am a less seasoned UFC fan than you are, and then a lot of the people that we interact with on social media are. My feeling is that the public seems to be leaning towards Jose Aldo here and really forgetting about what Peter Yan brings to the table. Let's think about the hype surrounding this guy. Is it not justified? Because we've seen him dismantle people, and it doesn't seem like he's been getting out of third gear. There's two ways that I would say that I want to bet on this fight, and I'll kind of run through them. Obviously, I feel very comfortable taking Peter Yan at minus 225. And if the public starts coming in on Jose Aldo, I'm going to feel even better about taking better odds on Yan. And if he can get down to that minus 200 range, I'll feel really, really good about it. But I'm at least doing a 2-unit play on Peter Yan there, just straight up. The other play that I like is under 3 rounds. And yes, Jesse, I think Peter Yan is going to either submit or knock out Jose Aldo, old man Jose, here before the end of the 3rd round. So those are the 2 bets I'm looking at there. I just think he's too smart. I think he's too calculated. I really don't see him getting carried away in the hype. He's just kind of like a fucking robot. So I don't really see him getting swept up by that. And it's his shot. And I just don't think that an older version of Jose Aldo is going to be able to hang. This is one of those cases that we've talked about in the past where it's that old and busted versus the new hotness. Old and busted, new hotness. I'm going new hotness, and I will every single time. So give me Peter Yan at minus 225 if that's what we can get him at.
JL, I've been watching fights with you for about 2 years now, and I can't think of a time we have been more far apart on our predictions. I came into
That makes me feel so good. Can I just say 2 words to you? Because I can think of a time where we were more far apart on our predictions. Those 2 words, Jesse, are Uriah Faber.
You bringing up Uriah Faber, Ricky Simone in a trophy parlay that I gave you with Ryan Hall and Jermaine Durandamy. I gave you those as a parlay, and then you came back around and threw Uriah Faber in there, which I thought for sure would blow that parlay up. And then you hit the grand slam. That was also where you hit a parlay on Luke Rockhold, Jorge Masvidal. Was there anyone else in that parlay?
No, that was different fights.
Yeah, different. Same month though.
Yeah,
It was the week before.
Nope, I had who did Rockhold get knocked out by?
Jan Blachowicz.
Yeah, I had Jan and I had Jorge and cashed out pretty heavily on that one as well. So
all right.
Oh man, listen.
I gave you those though.
You did on those 2, but you did not give me Uriah Faber. In fact, you told me I was stupid to do that. So let's hear why you like old man Jose.
All right. So I came in as well with 2 bets, right? First off, I'm going to put this on the table. I'm going to take the over 2.5 on this fight.
Is this counting as our head-to-head? Those count as a head-to-head too. So we're adding those to the head-to-head.
Yep.
I'm gonna take notes here.
Please do. Please do. All right. I'm going to start. Let's look at Jose Aldo. One of the greatest fighters of all time in the history of MMA. I will say this is a what have you done for me lately business, especially when we're talking about betting. I think at 145, the last couple fights on Jose's run, he was starting to look a little slower, a little washed up. But against Marlon Moraes, at 135, the pace, the pressure, how he looked in his volume, this was a better Jose Aldo than we've seen in his previous fights and the best one we've seen in a long time. Leg kick Aldo is one of the best fighters, if not the best fighter we have ever seen in the lighter weight classes. The thing that gives me hesitation on betting that leg kick Aldo is going to show up is that we haven't seen him since he fought Ricardo Lamas in 2014. That's 6 years ago now. Check my math. My question here, though, is he going to bring the leg kicks out? Because if he does, this is a runaway fight. Peter Yan is a boxer wrestler. You could throw whatever you want in there and add whatever you want. He's a boxer wrestler, puts a lot of pressure on that lead leg, and that lead leg is begging to get taken out. You take away his base, Peter Yan loses that bully mentality. And he's been a bully his entire UFC career. There's been one round where Peter Yan has looked somewhat questionable, and that was against Jimmy Rivera in the 3rd round. But Peter Yan already had 2 rounds in the bag that he knocked Jimmy Rivera down. The reason I'm leaning Jose Aldo, though, the main and biggest reason is experience. Jose Aldo's pace is built for a 5-round fight. This guy, I think he kind of...
Well, good thing it's not going to go 5 rounds, Jesse.
Well, we haven't seen Aldo get knocked out in the way that Peter Yan's not a Max Holloway volume striker, but he's also not a Conor McGregor knockout artist.
Can I just tell you, just quick stat to throw at you to combat that? Peter Yan has literally double the number of significant strikes on average than Jose Aldo does.
But look at who Peter Yan's fighting. Look at who Peter Yan is fighting. One, he's much more. He feels much more liberal to throw those strikes because he's not fighting nearly the same level as Jose Aldo. Also, Jose Aldo is fighting a slower pace because he's mostly fighting 5-round fights, and he's been doing it since 2009, I think, is when he won the WEC belt. I think I agree. Peter Yan, you can say he's the favorite here, and I would probably lean him as a favorite. But if I'm looking at value here, -185, 35% implied win probability is disrespectful for a fighter we have not seen go past the championship round and that faded against Jimmy Rivera in the 3rd. I'm going Jose Aldo. He's a 5-round fighter. He's the better striker. When it comes to experience, he's the better fighter. So, Jose Aldo, you're getting a 1-unit play from me all day, baby.
Yeah, I just think that this is going to stay on the feet. I think Yan is quicker. I think he's more powerful. I just think he has the tools to beat Aldo. And I don't think it's going to last more than 3 rounds, like I said. So I'm feeling a knockout coming, and I'm feeling a fight ending earlier than Jesse thinks it's going to end. I agree with you. I mean, if this goes 5 rounds, I think it starts to move in Aldo's direction. But I just can't see that bulldog mentality from Yan letting it get to that point. So that's fun, man. That's the first that's the first head-to-head that we're going to be tracking, and we're already on opposite sides. So I have a feeling that we're also going to be on opposite sides for Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. But since I opened up on Yan, I'm going to let you open up on this fight.
All right. I mean, I think there's only one fight you got to watch for film study on this one, and that was the fight back in December. You got a good idea of how they're both going to look when they come out. I think the one who has the most opportunity to improve is Max Holloway out of the 2. I think Max Holloway was neutralized and controlled very early by those leg kicks. Max Holloway wasn't checking leg kicks. He wasn't really switching stances as normally as he did, which I think would have benefited him against a heavy leg kicker. Also, Holloway found his adjustments late in that fight. I think I'm looking at this fight as rounds 6 through 10. They all have their reads through rounds 1 through 5. In the last 2 rounds of their fight in December, what Max Holloway was able to do was target the body, and he had a ton of success digging low with the body, and that slowed down Volkanovski's game. I think he's got to come at this as putting water in the basement, start early to that body, keep the long straights, the jabs to the body, left hooks to the body, use the great footwork to move away, and make sure you're checking those kicks. I don't put much credit, JL, if you're going to lean this way in the Zoom training. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I don't think it's true. Volkanovski, I think he's in a tough spot. Kind of like you said earlier, it's hard to beat the same person twice. I don't really know what specifically he's going to look at to try and change. He's not really a body striker. He hasn't really thrown a lot of body strikes in his whole UFC career. It's all leg kicks and then hooks and straights and switch stance combos to the head. It's a lot of feints, which makes it more deceptive, but I think we've seen his ceiling. And at the same time, I think Max Holloway can get even better. I'm going to lean Max Holloway. If you're asking me who I think the value is, I think it's Max Holloway. With all that being said, I still think Volkanovski's going to win the fight.
Oh,
I think Volkanovski, his game is
that's
just
bullshit. You were lining that up for Max Holloway the whole time. Don't Lee Corso me. Don't. Not so fast, my friend.
I think plus 195 is ridiculous. Max Holloway has more than a 33% chance implied probability to win that fight. I would say it's closer to 45%, which is value. But I still think Volkanovski is probably going to win this fight out of matchup. I think it's betting on too many what ifs if Max Holloway. Is Max Holloway going to check leg kicks? Is Max Holloway going to switch stances more? Is Max Holloway going to go to the body in rounds? These next rounds. I think there's a possibility for it, but I don't think it's enough possibility to put my money on Max Holloway to win.
So you spent a lot of time there analyzing Max Holloway and not a lot of time talking about the champ. And I feel disrespected for the former rugby player. And I can guarantee you, Jesse, if you were going to be in an octagon with one of these guys, I bet, I know you would be picking Max Holloway because you wouldn't want to go against a guy that has legs that are the size of literal tree trunks. I think there's a couple things that I get what you're saying about the adjustments that Max Holloway made in the later rounds in the last fight. But I think there's a couple things that you're discounting with Volkanovski and why he might be a safer play than a lot of people are thinking. One, I do think that this is very common in the UFC fandom where a former champ, someone who's maybe a little bit past their prime or fading out of the limelight, gets some credit that obviously Vegas doesn't think he deserves at this point. And we ignore the really, I mean, wealth of young, very talented, very athletic fighters coming up. And I think we need to give those guys a little bit more credit. You say Volkanovski doesn't have an opportunity to get better. He's at one of the best gyms in the world. And let's just take for a second into consideration the fact that New Zealand is the only country in the world that's been able to get back to normal as a result of COVID-19. While Max Holloway, I'm with you. I don't think he's been training over Zoom this whole time. I think DC said with Ariel Helwani yesterday that basically Max Holloway more or less admitted to that being the case. But I will say this, Volkanovski has definitely had, no matter what, a more normal training camp as a result of COVID-19. He has been fighting the same guys that he always fights. It's at a more normal training camp. He's at one of the best gyms in the world. Have we not seen Dan Hooker get better? Have we not seen Israel Adesanya get better? Why would we just assume that Volkanovski has reached his ceiling? To me, I can almost feel hurt by that statement, Jesse, and I feel like you're really discrediting the champ. So while you picked technically Volkanovski, I feel like you didn't. So I'm actually going to write it down as you picking Holloway and me picking Volkanovski because I think Volkanovski is going to win this fight handily.
My heart wanted to pick Max Holloway, and that's why I gave him all the chances in the world, but my wallet couldn't do it.
All right, so we both have Volkanovski there, but I agree with you. There probably is value on Max Holloway. I do think Volkanovski is going to win. So I'm probably not going to bet this fight, but maybe an opportunity to live bet. That's something that we have the luxury of doing, or I do at least. I don't know about Oregon, but I'm going to be watching that intently there in the first couple of rounds, see kind of how things are shaking out and make a play from there.
Now time to look at the main event of the evening. Man, I have to say this card got so much more exciting when Jorge Masvidal stepped in. I was heartbroken when I found out Gilbert Burns was going to fall off the card because of his positive COVID test. But I can't tell you how excited I was when I found out that the BMF champ was coming in to Abu Dhabi to fight Kamaru Usman for the 170 strap. I think this fight card just got a whole lot better, and this fight just got a whole lot more interesting from a viewer's perspective.
I mean, from a storyline perspective.
Yes, from a storyline perspective, I can side with you there. I will say, though,
because I don't know if this is actually a more interesting fight than Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns, but that's just me. I maybe we're going against each other again here, and I'm kind of excited for it. So
I mean, JL, I will say that the 2019 death of Jorge Masvidal and resurrection of Street Jesus was one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. A 3 KO run inside 1 year of Darren Till, Ben Askren, Nate Diaz. I think you got to really show me. You're going to have to dig pretty deep to find me a better non-championship run in UFC history. Then also you're looking at Kamaru Usman that just came off of a grudge match against Colby Covington where he went to war. I think some people had questions of how deep Kamaru Usman can go. Can he go that deep? John Jones, Israel Adesanya kind of depth into
I'm ready to
art.
die kind of deep.
Yep. And Kamaru Usman showed that he had it. He knocked Colby Covington out, which was his arch nemesis up to this point in his UFC career, in the 5th round in a very, very close fight. To me, this is a super fight. We got the BMF champ versus the UFC champ. JL, I'm going to give you the honors of kicking this one off. Please surprise me. Your take is super necessary.
Well, let's start by talking about Journeyman George. I'm just kidding. Okay, for real. Here's how I see it. Jorge Masvidal is going to be fighting basically Ben Askren, but way better. Kamaru Usman might not be a better pure wrestler than Ben Askren, but the skill set that Kamaru Usman has beyond that wrestling is what would concern me. Let's think about the odds on that Askren fight before Jorge Masvidal hit him with a flying knee. If I remember correctly, I think Ben Askren was a pretty heavy favorite going into that fight. And Masvidal obviously pulling a cat out of the hat, literally, and kneeing him in the face. Ben Askren made a very dumb decision in that situation. And I'm not taking anything away. It was probably one of the best, if not the best knockout ever. As Jesse mentioned earlier, won a lot of money on that fight. But I just don't see Kamaru Usman already been into two championship absolute wars to get his belt and also to defend his belt. Making any of the mistakes or making that same mistake that Ben Askren did. And I do think Kamaru Usman has the ability to strike at least enough to get it in a situation where it's favorable for him to go and grind out a victory. Obviously, if this fight was to stay on the feet the entire time, I do think Masvidal would have the edge. I think Kamaru Usman doing that with Colby Covington is actually throwing a lot of people who want to bet on Masvidal off because Kamaru Usman went to war with Colby Covington. I think Kamaru knew that, he was basically – Colby might be a little bit better a striker, but I think that he knew that he had the capability from a striking perspective to go with Colby and trade shots, and also was a little bit more of a grudge match. I think there's more contrived hate for these two going into this fight. I think it's less of that pure, real hate that it was very obvious that Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman had for each other. And I think Kamaru, if he's smart, which I do believe he is and cares more about winning the belt than anything else, I think he's going to do the right thing here and grind out a 5-round victory over an out-of-shape Jorge Masvidal. He just can't. I know that we've heard stories about him, actually training this entire time, pretending like he was actually going to fight Usman. And then, he's trying to drive up his own line so he can bet on himself. So he's posting pictures of himself eating pizza in Rome, Italy. I just think that this is a no-brainer to me. And even at minus 325, I think there's value on Kamaru Usman. And I just don't see Masvidal having the skill set to be able to compete. It's a great story, but the champ's gonna run away with this, man.
Yeah, I know my head was in the sky when I was introducing this fight, but let me just bring it back down for a second. If I'm Kamaru Usman, I could not be happier right now. I get to fight Jorge Masvidal on a week's notice, and I don't have to fight my teammate Gilbert Burns, who could potentially know all my secrets and is a great Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. I'm fighting mostly a stand-up striker with okay takedown defense on a week's notice. If I didn't say it again, on a week's notice. Um, Kamaru Usman, he's just the better fighter, man. I think Colby Covington was his biggest competition. It was the worst matchup for him on the whole entire roster. And Kamaru Usman knocked him out in the 5th round. Now I think it's going to be smooth sailing, and we're looking at a legitimate run coming from Kamaru Usman as a champion. I think we're in the Kamaru Usman era, and I don't see anyone beat him for a long time. As excited as I am of the potential of Jorge Masvidal coming out there and knocking Kamaru Usman out, I don't see it happening. I think minus 300 is about where the line should be. I think if you could get it between minus 280 and minus 325, pull it. For me, it's a 2-unit play on Kamaru Usman all day. It's a surefire bet for me. He's the better fighter. He's the better athlete. He has the better game. And this is how we're going to start the Kamaru Usman championship run here. And we're going to see him take this thing. I think it's a 5-round decision. I'm going to agree with you. So I'm going to look at taking the over as well.
I'm actually very excited for the Kamaru Usman kind of villain era because I think casual fight fans are not going to enjoy it. But frankly, this guy just wins. And I think he's going to take pleasure in grinding Masvidal down over the course of 5 rounds, especially a Masvidal who I just don't think is going to be able to hang for an entire 5 rounds. Masvidal's best shot is a knockout. And I think, to be honest with you, best shot is a knockout within the first 5 minutes. So, if it gets past round 1, and maybe Masvidal looks good in round 1, it gets past round 1, and Kamaru Usman and Masvidal are closer on the live betting line, I'm pulling that trigger all day on Kamaru Usman. I might even double down. I'm doing a 2-unit play on Usman as well.
I will go as far to say is even if Jorge Masvidal knocks down Kamaru Usman in the first round, I will double down on Kamaru Usman going into the second if he survives because of his cardio, because of his pace, and I think because of his wrestling and where he can keep this fight. If you really want to get weird and do a flyer, I think some of these betting websites they neglect the submission coming from Kamaru Usman. I think that's going to be an opportunity too because I don't think Jorge Masvidal's ever going to quit in there. So I think Kamaru might look for a submission on a fatigued Jorge Masvidal. Not a bad flyer play.
I like that. So we've got 4 head-to-head bets. I got Jan. Jesse has Aldo. I have under 3 rounds. Jesse has over 2.5. And then we both picked straight up Volkanovski and Usman. So those are our head-to-head picks here for this week. Keep track of those. And obviously when we have our episode next week, we'll be able to address that and see how much better I did than you, Jesse. All right, guys, hopping into our next segment. It's a new segment for you guys, trying something out. But before we do that, please remember to like and subscribe. By we, I mean Jesse, are putting a lot of work into putting this together for you guys. And a like and a subscribe goes a really long way to keeping us motivated to keep doing these. So if you like what you're hearing, please give us a shout out, maybe leave a comment, let us know what you'd like to see more of. And without further ado, let's roll into the breaking newsroom. We wish we had the technology to get a ticker across the bottom, but we're not quite there yet. We're waiting for those ESPN checks to come in, and then maybe we can structure that for you. But Jesse, let's talk about some news in the UFC this week. What's our first story?
Well, I think the first story on everybody's mind is we got to think about Paige Van Zandt. I mean, Paige Van Zandt, she's taken a break from her Instagram career to come in to her first UFC fight in a long time. Obviously, she has the eye of the casual viewer. She has a Dancing with the Stars background. She's been all over the place promoting this fight as far as you could do during a COVID situation. You know, JL, I think with Paige Van Zant, what are you thinking as far as her career going forward, win or loss? Is this going to be her last fight?
I would love to see her go out with a win and kind of use that as a bargaining chip for Dana. I think a lot of people are writing her off, saying that this is definitely going to be her last fight in the UFC. The way I see it, I really see a focused Paige going into this fight with Amanda Ribas. And even if she doesn't win, if she has a great performance against Amanda Ribas, I could really see her using that to leverage a new contract with the UFC. Obviously, just like with a lot of other stuff going on, we're talking about fighter pay. I think it sounds like she's making a lot of money on doing other things and promotional, and maybe she does want to move over and be on the same promotion as her husband. But to me, I feel like it's an opportunity for her to go and leverage that popularity that she has with good performance out there in the octagon. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think she's officially done with the UFC yet. She certainly hasn't come out and said as much, and it wouldn't hurt her at this point, already having signed the contract for the fight, to say that. So I think she's kind of betting on herself in a lot of ways.
I actually didn't consider that moving over to Bellator. I think that actually might be pretty beneficial for her to kind of fight some lower talent and also still be able to promote herself on a big money contract. That might be a good move for Paige. Moving to the next story, we got Israel Adesanya adding his name to the list of top UFC fighters that
who are challenging for the best dancer in the UFC.
Honestly, side note, pound for pound, we got Izzy, we got Yoel, we got Mike Perry. I think those are my top 3 dancers, pound for pound. But
there's no way Mike Perry knows how to do anything except grind. But anyways, moving on.
But Israel Adesanya adding his name to the list of UFC fighters that are obviously unhappy with their pay. Jay, I know we're going to dive deeper into this in our UFC debate segment, but what are the implications of this on Israel fighting this year?
Let's save that part for the fighter pay. As far as implications of him fighting this year, I think that's more of a result of who's going to be the one that's going to draw what Izzy needs to draw in order to get that payday that he's looking for. Who do you see him fighting next? Because I think it's starting to get tough to find an opponent that really makes sense for Israel Adesanya, especially after we saw the snooze fest of him and Yoel Romero.
I think it's unfortunate that Paulo Costa doesn't speak English, because I think that would be a good opportunity for him to really get some American fans or the general pay-per-view buying base, because the UFC is free in most of the other countries. For me, I think if Darren Till wins at the end of July, I think that would be a very interesting fight between Darren Till and Israel Adesanya, and you could draw some real fights and real money for that card. For me, man, I am kind of worried that we're going to see an Israel Adesanya holdout. I'm really concerned about that, but who knows? We'll see how this one plays out. Shifting to the next one, but this one was just announced today. We got Glover Teixeira taking on Thiago Santos. I can't remember the last time I was pumped for a Glover Teixeira fight, but what an interesting matchup between Glover Teixeira and Thiago Santos. Odds aren't even out yet on this one as it's taking place in September, but Joe, where's your lean?
It's definitely on Santos. My feeling on new blood versus old blood. And that's not going to change for me in my initial lean. I will say, man, it would be really fun. I really think that they should just make this the title belt at 205. just to see what Bones does, because I would really just get a kick out of Dana White doing that. Who cares, man? It's just, at this point, we're getting to the point where all a title belt is your promotional capability and ability to win that matchup when you do get that title shot. So why not just give it to him? And then when John Bones, if or when he decides to come back, then we'll have that fight. But because let's be real, there's nobody at 205 that is really even close to Jones right now. So if he's going to step away, I wouldn't mind making something like this a title fight and seeing what happens.
I don't appreciate your disrespect to Dominic Reyes, but I think
John Jones played with his food for the last time, and I don't want to hear anybody on Twitter say anything different. I don't like John Jones either. Nobody does. But it was very obvious the level of disrespect that he had in that fight, and I just don't think he took it seriously at all, and he still won.
Dude, all right. Shifting back to this topic, does Glover Teixeira get a title fight if he beats Thiago Santos?
No.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Other news today, Pedro Munoz came out today saying that he failed his drug test. Failed his COVID test, and is pulled from his fight this Wednesday against Frankie Edgar. This seems to be becoming a reoccurring issue. I mean, if you look at the other sports, you have the NBA dealing with this problem. You have the MLB dealing with this problem. We've been pretty lucky on the UFC side to not really have lose too many big fights to COVID-19. JL, are you worried about some of these main events coming up about COVID, or do you think that fighters are going to stay quarantined enough to give us the summer we need?
Really not trying to be a Debbie Downer here, but I think if the fighter is coming from America, we're probably pretty fucked. I think that we're going to see a few more of these positive tests pop up over the next couple of months, and it's definitely going to happen more with the American fighters. Frankly, in the U.S., we're just really not at the place that the rest of the world is as far as controlling this virus. And I hate to say it, but these fighters are kind of in that demographic where, like you and I are, where we're healthy young adults that probably think we're pretty immune to stuff like this, and also probably aren't taking all of the precautions that we should be in order to stay healthy. My only encouraging thing I could say about this is that maybe with these two back-to-back positive COVID tests and obviously both very high-profile fights, I think that maybe that'll cause fighters to be a little bit more aware of what they're doing and what what situations they're putting themselves in, and that way they have these opportunities to go and make a paycheck. So for me and you, probably doesn't matter if I get COVID. I certainly don't want that to happen, but ultimately it's not going to prevent me from doing my job as long as I recover. But these guys, I mean, there's too many issues with permanent scarring of the lungs. This is just not something that as a professional athlete you really would want to take any chances on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think especially with the weight cuts that these guys have to go through, I think you could be an invincible athlete, but going through these weight cuts,
for sure.
It really does leave you vulnerable. I am a little bit concerned. I just don't want to lose Darren Till versus Robert Whitaker. So, all right. Shifting to probably the biggest story for the majority of the week last week, the passing of Papa Nurmagomedov and Habib's father. Obviously, it was very sad. And one of the hard things for me to really think about is, one, the passing of a father, but also what is this effect going to do on Habib? What are we going to see from his MMA career? How is this going to affect his performances, or is he ever going to fight again? Because we know he's a family man. We know that that's kind of more important to him than anything else going on. Does he see this as an opportunity to really pick up the mantle of leading his family and just forget about MMA, or is this going to be a rejuvenation to his career? I mean, JL, so hard to really talk about this at the same time of a passing the previous week, but what are your thoughts on Nurmagomedov's career at this point?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, my thoughts to the family, and my thoughts to the gym and all the young people that Papa Nurmagomedov has mentored over the years, and listening to stories about the impact that he's had locally with MMA and development of kids at a young level and turning them into high level fighters. Sounds like he's had a very strong impact on the game as a whole. Shifting to talking about Habib, I can't see this being a situation where Habib would use it as an opportunity to get out of the sport. I think that would probably be, I'm speaking out of turn here, I'm sure, the last thing that his dad would want. Think about other passings in the sport. Think about Michael Jordan's dad. Think about Tiger Woods' dad. What did those athletes do at that point? You channel your energy into the sport that your dad taught you. I know that's what I would do in that situation. Really get back to the basics, and get back to what you love and channel that energy into training. So I think that, his dad always encouraged him to go out and find different coaches and learn from different people, to develop himself. So as far as that, I don't see that having an impact on his training. And certainly he should take all the time that he needs to get to a point where he's ready to fight again. But I don't think this is going to be the end of Habib by any means.
And yeah, I definitely hope not, man. I think we are still seeing the prime of Habib. I don't think he's slowing down. And right now, with the biggest fight of his career coming up in September, this would be a bad time to really for him to fall off the wagon. And I'd hate to see that this would be the reason that happening. At the same time, all respect in the world to Habib. This is a hard time for him, and hope he's doing well. Shifting to a more positive note, and probably the biggest story of the week, and probably what people are talking around your virtual water cooler is Jorge Masvidal, man. Street Jesus and the resurrection continues as he looks to take out Kamaru Usman. I know we just broke down the fight, but what are the implications that you're expecting, Jay, on this pay-per-view? Is this going to be the biggest sporting event of the summer, or what do you think?
It very well could be the biggest sporting event of the summer. I think it's definitely going to be the most hype. I'll just say this, and we've already talked about the fight enough. I think that it's really a shame that we didn't get to see, well, we'll see. Maybe he has been training this entire time and he's going to come out in great shape. But anyways, no matter what, Jorge Masvidal brings a level of excitement. I think, we're definitely going to see more pay-per-view buys as a result of this. It's going to only be good for the sport. Honestly, it would probably be really good for the sport for Masvidal to win. I can only see that having a positive impact. So I think that might be the storyline. If he actually does pull off, another surprising knockout, man, we're going to have this like cult hero fighter. He already is and has this cult following. And he's just very entertaining, man. I mean, you can't look away from whatever he's doing. And you can't knock the fact that he's had a hell of a run here. So we'll see what happens. And I'm excited to have him in there. And the more that I listen to interviews of him or see posts on Instagram or Twitter, the more I want to put my money on Jorge Masvidal, but my brain is telling me not to do it. So,
I think I was so excited when Jorge Masvidal got announced that he is going to fight for the strap. I've been watching the sport since about 2007. I remember Jorge Masvidal in Bodog fight. I remember him in Strikeforce. I remember his run a few years back that a lot of recent MMA fans may not recall, of beating Jake Ellenberger, beating Donald Cerrone, running in the Damian Maia, and thinking that if he can get past Damian Maia, he might be able to find his teammate Tyron Woodley. And now seeing the star that he's become, I think I would have to compare this to Nick Diaz coming over to the UFC was the last time I saw something like this, where he's really got this following behind him that just believe in him. And you want to root for the heir of Kimbo Slice. You want to root for Street Jesus to go out there and knock out Kamaru. And then think about where it could go from there. You think it's big now. If Street Jesus knocks out Kamaru Usman, I can say without a doubt we are looking at a Conor McGregor 170 title fight. The BMF versus the double champ. I think that would be probably the biggest fight in UFC history if we saw Jorge Masvidal versus Conor McGregor. So we're looking at
we could even see that if Masvidal loses. I mean, I could see them going for, fighting for the BMF belt. I think that would be fun to watch.
Yep.
Why not, man?
Press conference.
Oh God, I would, I would drop everything and watch that thing.
So, yeah, man, I think Jorge Masvidal on this card is what we needed. Gilbert Burns, all respect to him. He was on a run, but we didn't think we were going to see Jorge Masvidal this year. And now look at it. So, yep. All right. Now we're going to move into our next segment, our MMA
segment.
And our last segment, the MMA Great Debate. Here, me and JL go over the most debated topics of either the week of all time. This week, is Dana White paying his fighters fairly? There's been a lot of talk about this. I think the earliest that I can remember this starting was John Jones. Well, at least this year was John Jones being upset that he didn't get paid more money to take the step up to fight Francis Ngannou. Now it's involved to a whole new thing with Conor McGregor getting involved, with everybody from Jorge Masvidal, Israel Adesanya. This is starting to get me worried.
Paige Van Zant.
Paige Van Zant. We haven't seen hype like this around fighter pay since probably 2017, when we started seeing the fighter union talks come up more and more. JL, I'm going to let you kick off, man. What are your thoughts on this whole situation? And is Dana White paying his fighters fairly?
Yeah, we're supposed to be debating this. So I'm going to say that as of right now, yes, Dana White is paying his fighters fairly. The only way that you're going to grow the sport is to get out there and fight, especially with these big name guys. And I understand that why they would be asking for more money. They should absolutely do that. But ultimately, I feel like I have to be on Dana White's side here, especially as a result of COVID-19. Frankly, you don't have the gate receipts coming in. Yes, it's the only sport on television, but if we're not able to get big names in the ring, we're not going to be able to draw the same number of pay-per-view buyers either. My feeling is the fighters are kind of doing a disservice a little bit to the UFC and to the sport as a whole by holding out for $10,000 more dollars. Jorge Masvidal said that he didn't get everything he wanted, and he signed a 10-fight contract. So it just tells you that the UFC is still in a stronger position there. I think that they've built themselves up to being the premier, by far the premier promotion in the sport. And I don't really feel like going to another promotion when you're a big name fighter is a logical decision. UFC now partnered with ESPN. To me, they have all of the bartering power as being the legitimate promotion now, and really establishing themselves as the NFL versus like the XFL or the AFL is what it feels like to me. And at some point, the fighters need to are going to recognize that. And maybe the move is collective bargaining. I think that would be the smart way to go if you're a fighter, and I think that would be the smartest thing to do to get to a point where you feel fairness in the fighter pay.
Okay, so JL, is Dana White paying his fighters fairly? Yes or no?
I said yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I would say absolutely not. And reason being is ever since really, I think we go back, and this is a separate sport altogether, is boxing, but Floyd Mayweather made this a 1%er sport. I think he made it so that the top fighters are making that 50 million plus money. And the UFC kind of adopted that model as well with Conor McGregor. He's the one fighter that's bringing it home time over time over time. But if we look at the bottom end of those fighters, they haven't adopted that boxing model at the bottom end and that entry level. UFC is the biggest promotion out there right now. I think if we look at the top, if you look at in boxing, if you look at Top Rank, you look at Golden Boy, their bottom undercard fighters are still making twice, 3 times, 5 times as much as the undercard UFC fighters. You have some women fighters signing for 5-5, 10-10, 15-15. That is completely unacceptable, and it's not a livable wage when you start thinking about agent cuts, paying your gym, your everything that needs to go into running the camp. Some of these fighters, man, they are really, really struggling. You got people like Patrick Cummins, who's sleeping on couches. You got Curtis Blades, probably the number one contender outside of it, Francis Ngannou at the heavyweight division, unhappy with his pay. This is just a problem. If you have this many people complaining about their pay, you don't get this in any other sport. It's definitely a problem. Dana White, if you look up his net worth, he is making Floyd Mayweather type money.
That's a red herring, though. It's not about how much money Dana White makes.
Fair enough. But let's just say the UFC holds most of that revenue, most of the revenue within inside the company itself, and doesn't share it amongst the fighters. I believe the fighter cut is about 18%, while everything else stays inside the business. That you just can't operate that way if you're looking at the bigger sports that are 50-50 or 60-40 splits. It's
Couple
not okay.
couple counterpoints to that. Part of that money that stays in the UFC goes towards giving opportunities to fighters. I mean, you see something like the Contender Series, you see something like the training facility that they have in Vegas that's open to UFC fighters that are on a contract. Other promotions don't have stuff like that. You're more out on your own. You don't have the expertise that and the money that UFC is putting behind developing the talent. I will say this, man. I do think that you've kind of flipped it on me. I'm not going to hate on you for it. You kind of flipped it on me for talking about the big money guys, and you made me feel bad about the little money guys out there that are, on smaller contracts. I do think that the UFC sees the value in developing their roster. I think that they understand the fact that a deep roster means more options for themselves, especially when it comes to a situation like we're seeing right now, when you got a Gilbert Burns and Jorge Masvidal giving themselves that option was exactly what the UFC is trying to do. I think it could be a win-win if you're looking at it from that perspective to do a collective bargaining agreement, because you're going to be able to bring good talent into your promotion, pay them in a way that's going to make them full-fledged professionals instead of having somebody like Felicia Spencer who is teaching math full-time while also getting title shots. I think that could be a win-win situation if we were to move to a CBA type situation. And that's the only way, Jesse, that the fighters will get anywhere close to a 60-40. I think even a 30-70 split would probably be a win for them at this point, which is probably closer to what you see for baseball. But you got to keep it. You got to keep that talent roster. You got to keep that depth in place, while also paying the top guys. And I think that this topic, the way it was set up originally, was more about those top guys and less about putting that talent roster in place. But I think you kind of have to balance both of those things, and maybe a CBA is the way to do that.
I mean, even if we do talk about the top guys, JL, Israel Adesanya, Jorge Masvidal, John Jones, they're not making that top level boxer money. Canelo Alvarez has taken between 30 and 50 million a fight. These guys aren't doing anywhere close to that. I think they're making 10 million if they're lucky. John Jones, the greatest MMA fighter of all time, is just asking for Deontay Wilder money. I think if you go up to people on the street and ask them who John Jones is and who Deontay Wilder is, they're probably not going to know Deontay Wilder, but they'll definitely know John Jones.
So yeah, that's where I think we're wrong. If you think about, you and I used to work at the same office. I think more people knew who Deontay Wilder was in our office than John Jones. I think the UFC still has a long way to get to that point, but the UFC needs to do the right thing here, and get to a situation where fighters are going to feel comfortable from a pay perspective. Do I think it's fair in the moment? I do, actually, especially at the top level guys, based off of the amount of money that the UFC is bringing in. But the UFC needs to take a long-term approach to this and not end up in a situation where they're like boxing. Honestly, it will definitely be better for the fighters, as far as a pure pay-per-view buy or gate receipt perspective, if this moved to a sport that had multiple promotions, because you could have multiple promotions bidding for their services. But if we really want this to be a mainstream thing, and I think that when you look at promotional deals and sponsorship money, you want this to be in the same realm as an NBA or an NFL, or even an MLB. These fighters are going to make more money or equal money outside of the sport, just like we see with LeBron James, just like you see, with Mike Trout in baseball. This is not uncommon where an athlete is actually making more money from their promotions than what they're actually getting paid on on their roster. It's not an uncommon thing in professional sports. And in order to get that legitimacy and get those promotions, I feel like there kind of has to be mainstream, like one end-all be-all promotion that the average person can look at and say, yes, Stipe Miocic is the heavyweight champion. I know who that is, and there's not four of them.
I think the UFC is already there. I think that's why you have people going around the street that say I train UFC. At the same time, I think kind of what we're getting to now, and it's kind of walking through this discussion, is I think pay-per-view just needs to go away, and these TV deals are going to be how these fighters get consistent pay, because fighters relying on pay-per-view buys leads for a fluctuation in revenue for the company and also a fluctuation in their pay. So if the company knows how much they're going to get paid annually, and not, I know right now they do have that ESPN deal, but their bigger cards aren't on ESPN. Their bigger cards are on pay-per-view. So I don't know. I think maybe there has to be a total reconstruction of the business before this is legit reasonably solved. And also we have the end of the Reebok deal that also took away fighter compensation as well. So I don't know, Jay, I think we could talk about this all day long. I don't think it's a issue that's going to be solved this year.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that there's definitely work to be done here. I'm not saying that there's not. And we need to create opportunities for both this to remain the number one promotion and really the legitimate promotion, because you could end up at a point where if this bubbles up too much, it's going to detract from that and end up in a stalling of the sport altogether. I think if you're an MMA fan, you really do want the UFC to be successful as a whole. And as a result of that, I hate to be the trickle-down economics guy, because that's not what I believe personally on a more macro level. But as far as it relates to sport, these fighters are definitely going to have more promotional opportunities, like I said, like we see in other sports, as the UFC begins to grow and as their recognition within the UFC grows. So that's my 2 cents on that. We don't want to end up in a situation where there's 4 heavyweight champs. That's just for the average sports fan who wants to tune in to baseball during the summer and fall, football during the fall and winter, and basketball, during the fall, winter, and spring. I think the average sport fan needs that one promotion and needs to know who the main people are. So.
Yep, I completely agree with you. Well, that's the show today, guys. I hope you liked it. A bunch of new segments. Tell us what you think in the comments. We want to keep getting better for you guys. Like the video, subscribe. As always, ISO Lando, take it home.
You've been staring at the clock, hoping time will tell. I've been thinking about the shots, hoping I won't fail. Better deal for your soul, thinking I won't sell. Asking if I get some money.